Meeting to order at 9:04. Let's go over the attendance. Commissioner Higgins is here. Anybody else want to chime in?
Commissioner Pipe.
Here.
Commissioner
Okay,
Pipe.
Controller Colleen Kennedy.
Or even treasurer.
The Treasurer Colleen Kennedy. Controller Jason Mosier. Administrator Margaret Gray. Trying to remember, is Tom Martin a voting member of the committee? Mike's nodding his head yes. You there, Tom?
Yes, I'm present.
All right, and then we have several guests from Baker Tilly, at least two of whom are named John.
Actually, all three are named John.
All three are named John. I didn't want to commit to all three being named John because that was going to be really confusing. All right, you guys tell us how we keep that straight. All right, so I think I'm still chairing this as the former chair of the Finance Committee. The next item is public comment. I'm not seeing, I think, any public on the list. So we'll move on to meeting minutes. The last meeting we held was September 5th, 2019. Those were attached in the email that Natalie sent out yesterday. Any changes, alterations, or corrections to the minutes?
Nope.
All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes, do so by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Do we need a
All right.
motion to approve?
I am sorry. Let's have a motion first. Let's do it proper.
So moved.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the motion made by Treasurer Colleen Kennedy, approve the minutes, do so by saying aye.
I'll second it.
He'll second it. Okay. I'm just trying to keep this thing moving.
I know.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, with that bit of brilliance, we will move to new business, which is election of chair. And I think, based on some earlier organizational meetings, doesn't that default to the administrator for the first minute or two?
Well, typically what we've done with the other meetings is I would convene the meeting because there was no appointment of a chair and vice chair at that point, but I'm not sure that this follows the same protocol. So, I'd be glad to ask for a motion for nominations from the floor to nominate someone for chair of the Finance Committee. Are there any nominations?
I'll make a motion to nominate Commissioner Mark Higgins as chair of the Finance Committee.
Would there be a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying yes.
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 Opposed? Motion carries, and Commissioner Higgins is the chair of the Finance Committee, and I will turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. Now I believe we're going to take nominations for vice chair. I believe that is a fairly open position. I believe anybody else on the committee can serve in that capacity. Generally, of course, you don't have to do too much except if we do need a finance committee meeting when I'm not available. Who would like to make a nomination for a vice chair?
I think since we have some new members, if the controller or the treasurer, one of them would be willing, I think that would be a fitting opportunity for them. I don't think it's been previously discussed before this meeting, so In terms of Colleen or Jason, if either of you had an interest, that would be a suggestion I'd make.
I'd be happy to serve.
I'll make a motion that Colleen Kennedy is vice chair of the Finance Committee.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion on the floor for Treasurer Colleen Kennedy to be the vice chair of the Finance Committee, properly moved and seconded. All those in favor do so by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Do you vote for yourself, Colleen?
Oh, aye then.
All those opposed? All right, motion carries. So I believe our next item of new business is the audit update from Baker Tilly. Tom or Jason, were you two gonna do any introduction to this?
I think we can just turn the floor over to the Johns, John Compton, John Lincoln, John Taylor, and they can introduce themselves and go through I think everybody may have gotten the PowerPoint copy. If not, they'll be going over that as we meet today.
Okay.
All right, well, let's the Johns
get
take it
started.
away.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate your taking the time to be with us here this morning, albeit remotely. I think we're going to try to share our PowerPoint via your screen. Mr. Link is going to try and cue us up there. In fact, I think I see it there. Hopefully that will work for us. If not, I will kind of announce the slide that we're on as we go here. So our purpose this morning is to give you an update on the 2019 single audit. This has been an unusual year, to say the least. We were probably about 33% of the way into the audit around mid-March, when the pandemic really started to close things down. We shifted gears at that point and began to work remotely, and it actually worked pretty well. We've been surprised. The nature of our business as auditors is we're oftentimes in other people's offices working remotely with laptops and monitors and that sort of thing. So it wasn't too difficult for us to kind of shift gears and audit from our home locations. And we use a piece of software known as Huddle that enables us to share information securely in the cloud, as they say, and that really has been a game saver for us. So we appreciate the county's willingness to work with us in that format. Although it works, it's not as easy as us actually being there on site. And I would say as of today, we're probably about 75% or 80% of the way there. The county has traditionally prepared a comprehensive annual financial report. If you hear us use the expression CAFR, that's what we're talking about. That is due June 30th, which is 26 days away now. We're still shooting for that goal. The controller has requested an extension through the Government Finance Officers Association, and they have agreed to that extension through July 31st. So if we're not done with the audit by June 30, we're pretty sure that we will be done by the 31st. John, if you could move on to slide 2. Here's what we'll cover here this morning briefly. The folks who are doing the audit work, the engagement team, there are certain required communications that are supposed to take place between the audit firm and what the auditing standards refer to as those charged with governance. And in this case, that would be the Board of Commissioners. And normally, we would have had this discussion with you by this point in time, but because of COVID-19 and our kind of being displaced here for a bit, we're kind of combining two meetings together here. In both, we'll discuss audit planning and we'll provide an update as to where we stand. In terms of thought leadership, Baker Tilly has a tremendous amount of information out there available on our website regarding auditing developments, accounting developments, things that governmental leaders might want to be aware of as it relates to this process. We won't get into that today, but we'll leave you with that thought that if you are so inclined and have an interest in that sort of thing, BakerTilly.com, our public sector area of that website, has all sorts of information that we think will be of interest. John, if you can move on to slide 3. Here's the audit team. As we said, 3 Johns and a Christine. We all have been doing this for some time. I've been with the firm for, it'll be 32 years this July. I stepped in on behalf of Rick Bear, who had retired, I think it was November of 2019. I had worked with Rick for probably 20 years before he retired. And I actually did a tour of duty on Center County. It's probably going back maybe 15 years or so ago. I think we had done your audit work from maybe circa 2000 through 2010 or 2012, and I had been involved in that process at that point in time. The 2 Johns, between the 2 of them, probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 years worth of experience, and Christine has been with us for, I would say, maybe 5 years now. There are a lot of people who work behind the scenes on this audit who are not depicted here in this information, folks that work in a quality control perspective or administrative people. It's an audit of this nature is a big undertaking, and it takes a pretty sizable team to work through it in the time frame that's allotted. So that's our team. Moving on to slide 5, we'll get into these so-called required communications. I'll pause here and just do a quick sound check. Is my volume okay? Can everyone hear well enough?
Sounds
Yes.
good to me.
Yep,
Yes.
I can hear you
Okay.
fine.
Good, thank you. On slide 5, this is what we're auditing for the county. This is what is known as a single audit. It's kind of a funny name because it's 2 audits rolled into one, quote, single audit. We're auditing the county's financial statements in the form of this comprehensive annual financial report, and we will give an opinion on the county's financial statements. There are all sorts of external users of your financial information, your citizenry, your investors, your bondholders, the federal government, the state government, so forth. The concept of an audit is that someone independent of the financial reporting entity, in this case Baker Tilly, does testing. We gather evidence to support an opinion on your financial statements. And then those third-party users that I just touched on have some assurance that someone independent of the reporting entity has looked things over and essentially is certifying the information. The other piece of the single audit, because the county receives and expends a significant amount of federal financial assistance, we are essentially standing in the shoes of the federal government and auditing those programs for compliance. Since 1984, that has been the arrangement. Certified public accounting firms such as Baker Tilly do that work on behalf of the federal government. The federal government and its various inspector generals could still decide to come on site and audit the county directly. But in lieu of that, our firm is kind of doing that work. And in that area of the single audit, we will give opinions on your major federal programs as to whether the county has complied with all of those rules and regulations that are part and parcel to receiving and expending that money. Traditionally, the CAFR is its own. It's an enormous report. I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 200 pages. That's one document. The single audit will contain the various pieces of that federal audit, and collectively those documents will be uploaded to, there's a federal audit clearinghouse where that audit gets filed. The single audit is not due until September 30th. Traditionally, the federal government gives you 9 months to complete those audits. In this situation this year, because of COVID-19, they've extended that due date for another 6 months. So the county's December 31, 2019 single audit will not be due to the federal government until March 31st of 2021. So we've got quite a while to do this work and get it done. We don't think it will take that long. We're hoping to stick to the original September 30 filing date for that single audit, but we will certainly keep you posted if for any reason that cannot be done. John, if we could move on to slide 6. Slide 6 is our schedule. As I mentioned, the audit started in the March vicinity, started in earnest during March. I would say we're probably 75 to 80% of the way done at this point in time. We're still working remotely. I think we plan on working remotely until we're finished, or we get to a point where we need to come on site there at the county. And should that be the case, we can do so. But again, our goals in terms of the CAFR is June 30 and or July 31st, depending upon how things go here in the short term. And then the single audit, we're hoping to be done with that by September 30th. John, if we could move on to slide 7. Okay, on slide 7, we're talking about areas of audit emphasis. These audits that we perform, they're conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, government auditing standards, and then what the federal government refers to its uniform guidance. These are risk-based audits. We make an effort to spend our time as to where we think the risk lies within the county's operations. Areas that we consider to be of more significant risk would be things that would be more susceptible to either error. These accounting rules, these federal compliance requirements are very complex. And it's quite simple just to misinterpret what the requirements are and not handle things appropriately. We're also concerned with fraud, that someone might be either stealing from the county or misrepresenting financial information, anything along those lines. So we try to design our audit procedures to focus on where we consider the risk to be. Examples, the county holds a significant amount of cash and investments. We're concerned with what we call existence. Do those cash and investments actually exist? In order to address that assertion, we will confirm that information directly with your banks and your investment trustees. That's all done electronically nowadays, where they'll report to us what they're holding on behalf of the county, and we'll in turn compare that information with the county's financial records. I had mentioned these federal and state programs, the requirements there in areas of things such as cash management, allowability of cost, eligibility, federal financial reporting, and so forth. The rules are tricky. And, we're looking at this stuff day in, day out, and we find it sometimes difficult to interpret. So in those higher risk areas, we're doing various audit procedures to try and address the risk that there might be some issues. Bottom line, the higher the risk, the more audit attention we're going to pay for it. In areas that we think are less susceptible to fraud or misinterpretation of accounting rules or requirements, we're probably going to spend less time in those areas. John, on to slide 8. I touched on this a little bit. These are the different federal compliance, the things we take into consideration when we're performing a compliance audit of your various federal programs here. And at the bottom of that slide, we're touching on some of the things I had mentioned previously, such as the federal government wants to make sure that the monies they're passing through to, in this case, the county, most of which comes through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It originates with the federal government, passed through to the state in turn passes it through to the county. They're concerned that you're spending that money as per what they intended the dollars to be spent for, and we're testing for your compliance with that sort of thing. Okay, on to slide 9. I had mentioned these required communications. There are 3 different levels of rules that we need to adhere to when doing this audit work. Generally accepted auditing standards requires that the audit firm have a direct line of communication with what the auditing standards refer to as those charged with governance, or in this case, the Board of Commissioners. And there's certain things that we need to discuss with you. And over on to, I think it's slide 10, John. One of the things that we need to talk with kind of a cross-section of the auditee about is whether or not there has been any fraud that has taken place within the organization. And fraud could be, as we view it, theft of county assets, misrepresentation of financial information, individuals overstating their time or not recording paid time off or vacation or what have you. So we will, and we have had conversations with a cross-section of county employees, and we need to ask the Board of Commissioners as to whether you might have an awareness of any fraud that might have taken place within the county, either in 2019 or currently. And we can have that discussion here this morning, and oftentimes the board prefers that we have these conversations one-on-one. So we will defer to the Board of Commissioners in this case, and if you would like to talk about it in this open forum, we can. Or if not, we've left our email addresses and telephone numbers. I think that's in the first or second, the early part of the slide deck. So you can certainly reach out to us either through phone or email, and we can talk in that manner. So Mark, I will ask you what your preference would be in this case.
All right. Does the rest of the committee have any thoughts on that?
So from my perspective, to answer the first question, I do not have any knowledge of any fraud or suspected fraud at this time.
Thank you.
It's the same for myself. We've occasionally had staff approving their own overtime, but I think 2 audits ago we put controls in place to take care of that.
Okay. Okay, well, we appreciate it. If anyone thinks of anything after this call, please feel free to call us or email us, and we'll take it up at that point. John, on to slide 11. Just a few key points. I think everyone understands this, but in an audit, if you were to read the auditor's opinion on your financial statements, the expression of the opinion would be something along these lines. In our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the County of Center and the results of its operations. So that phrase, in all material respects, we are auditing to get to the point where we feel we have a reasonable basis for our opinion on your financial statements. That reasonable basis translates to reasonable assurance as opposed to absolute assurance. We don't audit every single transaction. We don't give an opinion that the numbers are 100% accurate. That would be far too time consuming and expensive. The expectation is that the auditor kind of get to the point where they feel they have a reasonable basis for an opinion on your financial statements. So we do set materiality thresholds. there might be things that we come across that, might not be 100% in line with generally accepted accounting principles, but we might say to ourselves, this could be done differently, but it's not material to the financial statements, so we're not going to waste the county's time or the public's time on this. So that's important to understand. There are things that come up from time to time in an audit where, it might be of concern to the government itself, but from the overall financial reporting perspective, it's not material. We're certainly happy to entertain any concerns that anyone might have on anything, but just want to make the point that the scope of the audit is this concept of reasonable versus absolute assurance. Also, your system of internal control over financial reporting, which is a mouthful, it's that series of policies and procedures and the way that the county does things on a day-to-day basis. We will look at that system of internal control over financial reporting for purposes of designing our audit procedures, but this type of audit does not involve the auditor giving an opinion on that system. So any commentary we might have on the way that the county does things is more so a byproduct of the audit than it is kind of our purpose for being there. And we will likely issue a management letter or a constructive service letter with suggestions for the county. Oftentimes those are things that, in the course of doing our audit, we've come across this particular issue. You might want to think about maybe handling this differently. But again, our purpose for being there is to give an opinion on the county's financial statements. It's federal program compliance, and we're not opining on kind of the way that you're doing things. There are audits that do that. If you've heard of a Sarbanes-Oxley audit, which is a public company audit, in those cases, it does involve the auditor giving an opinion on the system of internal control. It's a whole different kettle of fish, so to speak. The auditee needs to document their internal control. They need to provide assertions as to what it is intended to accomplish. The auditor tests the internal control and ultimately gives an opinion on it. But this type of single audit at this level, that's not part of the equation. So just want to make sure that's understood. John, on to slide 12. And very quickly, I will touch on independence. The heart and soul of an audit is that the auditor is independent of the auditee. Those independence rules are super strict nowadays. We really have to be careful that we're independent of the institutions that we're auditing. Anytime we do some type of work that's not considered audit work, which in our business that's referred to as non-attest services, we have to be careful that we're not crossing that line and auditing our own work, if you will. It tends to be more of an issue in smaller, less sophisticated governments where they need help with their bookkeeping. I like to think that we're good guys and we like to help, but to the extent that we're doing too much bookkeeping, you can get to a point where you're no longer independent of the entity that you're auditing. And the point we're making here on slide 12 is that there are certain non-attest services we provide for Centre County. We assist with once the numbers are arrived at, we will assist with the preparation of the financial statements. We will assist with interpreting these new accounting rules as they come out, etc. And we're always careful that we try not to cross that line. We always make sure that there's someone at Centre County who understands the topic and can kind of review and approve anything we might suggest. So just to make that point, independence is critical to this process, and we feel that we are indeed independent with Center County. Okay, I'll pause there. That's a lot of kind of technical backstory on the audit process and see if anyone has any questions. If not, I'll pass it over to another John, and he will give you an update on what's been done to date and kind of what's not yet done at this point and where we're heading from here. So any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. John Link, do you want to take it from here?
Yep. So I will give a brief update on where we're at right now with the audit. Like John Compton said, we are probably about 80% of the way through the audit right now as of June 4th. Some of the things here listed on this slide 14 that are still open is the property, plant, and equipment. The controller's office knows this. I believe they just got this information, so they're reviewing it right now. This will also affect the internal service funds. So once we get that information, there will still be some journal entries to happen to flow through the CAFR. Also, there is a new accounting standards for GASB 84 from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. This is in regards to fiduciary activities. We've been working with Travis and Jason with these, and just some new how it looks in the statements and how they are being treated, and this will affect. There will be a restatement on the general fund in regards to this new accounting standard that the county is adopting this year. It won't be a material restatement, but that's it. It will just take some extra time to work through. In regards to that, now that all these, before it was more of just showing for these custodial funds, just showing an asset and a liability. Now all the ins and outs will be presented on the financial, so there will be more testing to go into those as well. Overall, so far this year, even being remote, it has gone very smooth. One thing I will commend Travis and the controller's offices, all the grant testing and that this year went very smooth compared to the prior year. Time frame and all that was definitely accelerated. The last thing here is it was very challenging, as John mentioned, with COVID-19. I mean, we were all remote, which isn't too hard for us now that we're usually in that capacity. But I know for the controller's office and that this was more of a burden for them, and they have helped us the entire way. We've kept an open line of communication with them the whole time, passing back open items, and we've stayed on task and are hitting most of our marks right now in regards to that. If anybody has any questions related to that or any comments, if not, I can turn it back over to John Compton for thought leadership if we want to touch on that today.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I'll pause for questions or. Okay, I think I'm looking at the clock here. It's about 9:38 a.m. I had mentioned earlier on that the firm has all sorts of information out there specific to state and local government. We won't get into that here this morning, but it's worth checking into. It's not only technical accounting and auditing type things, what's on the horizon, how other governments are dealing with it, but there's a lot of information related to COVID-19 and federal and state programs and the effect it might have on your organization. So if you're so inclined, check it out. If not, we'll keep you posted through this process. And I think that's all we have here this morning.
Well, great. Thank you very much for presenting. Want to double check in again with Tom and Jason, since the audit is an area that the two of you work very closely with. Any other comments from our controller or our finance director?
This is Jason. I just wanted to thank the John Compton Taylor and Link for being willing to meet today. I know we kind of threw this together at the end of last week or so. And just wanted to quickly note that a lot of the work that went into the county side of this audit, the direct conduit to Baker Tilly from the county at this point has been Travis, and he's done a phenomenal job in making sure a lot of this data and the reports and everything are getting to Baker Tilly in a timely fashion. So I just wanted to thank him as well. I know he was on the call. I don't know if he still is, but I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that. So thank you.
Yeah, this is Tom. I just would, again, I appreciate everything, the overview of everything. Again, I think everything has been going pretty well. We've had, a new controller come in, new treasurer, and everything for the most part with everything that's been going on has been going pretty smooth. I've been communicating specifically with Travis and the controller's office. And again, we're on pace right now for that, hopefully for that end of the June for the CAFR date. I did want to say, again, we kind of confirming where we're landing as far as where the unassigned fund balance was, and we seem to kind of be on the same page. I'm going to be sending out information to the administrator and then to the BOC to kind of review some of these year-end numbers and where we're at. And as part of those discussions, there might be, we may move some of that money that's in the unassigned into other funds. So I'll coordinate that and communicate that information with the controller staff so that can be communicated with Baker Tilly so that any adjustments that would need to be made to the CAFR could be made. But again, most of the numbers and everything are in place right now. Like John talked about, the only thing that really needs to be, that's going to have an impact right now is some of the internal service funds based on the journal entries that are going to be done related to the capital assets.
Great, thanks for those comments. Anyone else have anything to discuss or mention about the 2019 audit update?
This is Steve. Do we have an idea when the audit will be essentially complete?
Steve, it's John Compton. It's the first due date. The original due date is June 30. We're shooting for that. That's going to be tight for sure. Jason had requested an extension through the Government Finance Officers Association through July 31st. So we do have that as a backstop. In terms of a draft copy of the CAFR itself, I think if we are to issue it by June 30, we would need to have it kind of out to all interested parties within the county at least a couple of weeks in advance so that you can look at a draft of it. John Taylor or John Link, do you guys have an estimate as to when we think we'll have a solid draft that we can circulate?
Hi, this is John Link. We're still working with Travis on, like I said, most of the audit work is complete, but we're still working through getting some of the support for the disclosures. So based on that, once we start getting that information, then we can get it into the CAFR and to John Compton then to review. So it would be hard to give a solid date right now.
That's fine. So by the end of July is what you're shooting for, essentially?
Yes.
I can't imagine we won't be done by the end of July, Steve.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, very good. Glad to see you've joined us, Steve. Any other questions on the audit?
No, none for me.
All right. For the rest of the agenda, I see nothing under old business. I don't think we had anything planned for open discussion, but is there any open discussion?
Yes, Commissioner, I did have one item, well, two really, but one, I guess, for today, which was in other committees and boards that we have, we've discussed putting the agenda and the minutes online so that folks could look at the agenda prior, and then also we'd have the minutes for public record. And we've done that, for other groups. And so I would like to suggest to the Finance Committee that we do the same thing for this group in the future.
I mean, overall, that sounds good. There might occasionally be something we're discussing that might run under confidentiality. I suppose the committee could talk about that when we come to it. Any other thoughts from the committee?
None.
Nope, I agree with the sentiment.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right. So it looks like by consensus, the board is okay with posting agenda and minutes on the county website, although occasionally we may need to discuss something confidential, and we'll figure out how we handle that when we come to it. You said you might have had something else?
Yes, also just to draw people's attention to, I believe Natalie sent an email out regarding the makeup of the committee, and it looks like historically it's varied. There's been some core members that have always been there, but it's varied in terms of other folks. And so maybe at our next meeting or prior to that, we could have a discussion about who are actually voting members and who are not, just so we can verify that going forward. And yeah, because it looks like in some years it's included some people, sometimes it hasn't. So it'd be good to maybe set that for this upcoming term.
All right, Natalie, could you kind of pre-place that as an agenda item for our next meeting?
Yes, I can do that.
Great, thanks. All right, any other open discussion? All right, so as a result of today's open discussion, we're going to make arrangements to post the agenda publicly and the minutes publicly once available and approved for the committee. And then at our next meeting, we'll discuss the voting members of the committee. Don't believe I had any announcements. Margaret, did you have any announcements related to Finance Committee?
No, I did not. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. See
Thank you, everyone.
See a number of you.